try to. So yeah, so I've been a carpenter coming up on almost a decade. I spent 1 year briefly as a staff organizer, as a new organizer for the Committee of Interns and Residents, organizing resident positions. So that's a pretty big or pretty drastic jump in terms of different parts of the labor movement. I won't go too much more into my biography with that, but so looking through the readings. First of all, really excellent set of readings. I love seeing what the North Brooklyn Night School is up to, because it's always like some of the best selected like material that I've seen. And there were some new ideas for the additional readings too. That I'm like I should dig into some of those as well. So kind of I guess framing this conversation with the big questions. Why do socialists think workers in particular have both the capacity and the incentive to drive social change? I mean, I think this is something that we think about and talk about frequently in DSA. It both seems very intuitive, but it's also worth taking a step back and looking at from time to time. We know that workers have both the capacity and the incentive. The incentive, I'm going to start with the incentive because I actually feel like that's a little bit simpler. We know that the working class is at odds with the capitalist class. Our interests are entirely different. Employers have the power at the workplace and in society, and it means that we don't necessarily get what we need. Workers have the potential capacity because we're the source of profits for the capitalist class. It gives us a huge opportunity to halt production and halt profits. This doesn't mean though, and I think everybody knows this, otherwise we wouldn't be here in DSA, but this doesn't mean that we have the capacity to do this tomorrow. It's building up that capacity is a muscle. We have to learn how to flex again. I like to think of it as a muscle. It's something that we've lost for many years, and it's just like still, even with we're seeing an increase in private sector strikes right now. It's still just like a sliver of what it needs to be. It's just just very small sections of the working class are beginning to learn how to flex that muscle again and halt production. Another big question that that's kind of posed in this: can socialists play a role in reviving the labor movement today? My simple answer, my short answer is yes. I think we absolutely need to play a role in reviving the labor movement today. We need more socialists in the labor movement to do it, but I think you'd also be surprised. From what I've seen, a few dedicated socialist organizers in a union can actually do a ton. If there's even a couple people, you'd be surprised you're able to organize a lot. If there's a dozen, it can potentially be really incredible what you can do. So even small numbers of dedicated socialist organizers can potentially make a huge difference. And I'm going to keep having to sip on the water here because talking in the mask is gets me really right out. Just as an example, I've been in the Carpenters Union a decade. In that time, I have occasionally come across other leftists and socialists. They are out there in the building trades, believe it or not, or we're sometimes few and far in between. But even just having a small core, a couple years ago, we had a contract campaign, and we started out with really a pretty small core, and it was mostly younger carpenters and a few a few people about to retire and on their way out, and only a few of us would consider ourselves socialists. There were a few people in the group that were inspired by Bernie Sanders that started calling themselves a democratic socialist because of Bernie Sanders. And we were able to kind of take this small group and eventually turn 600 people out to a rally for the contract. So like that's kind of one example of like, you know, we have a bigger union than that. We have almost 17,000 members, so we're going to need to build more power than what we were able to build there. But that's one example. It really doesn't take a lot of dedicated organizers to start to create some momentum. Let's see. Another thing that I was kind of I was asked to potentially comment on, what is DSA's relationship to the strikes happening right now? I think there's kind of two strains of this to look at. There's educator strikes that were happening in 2018 and 2019, and then some of the educators shutdowns during COVID or during 2020. While those involved small numbers overall of DSAers, the DSA members involved played very significant roles. And I think this sometimes has gotten overlooked, or it's not something that's like broadly known in the media. Sometimes people have wanted to keep their membership relatively low key because of some really intense red baiting that went on in their unions. But while the numbers were small, we've had a number of key DSAers involved in those strikes in most places, not in every place. In West Virginia, we did. In East Bay, we certainly did. In Denver, we did. And I think it just goes to show once again, and it's not like it was just DSAers organizing the strikes. It was clearly much bigger, but I still think that in some of those cases, DSAers were able to play a really significant role in terms of raising class consciousness and kind of having a broader view of what was going on and being connected to a larger movement in a way that gives you that broader perspective. These strikes also made it all the more possible to recruit educators to DSA through the strikes. So at this point, we have over 2,000 educators in DSA. In terms of union membership in DSA, it's like by far our largest percentage. And I think that trend existed before the strikes, but I think it really was like increased and compounded through the strikes and through some of the recruitment that chapters were able to do. In the majority of the private sector strikes happening now, DSA members are not at the heart of the strikes for the most part. Many of these strikes happening have few or no DSA members at all. John Deere stands out. We're fortunate to have DSA members who grew up in the area, who know a lot of the John Deere strikers, but we don't have DSA members like they're at the heart of the strike in the same way. They're not the ones on strike. This demonstrates something about our membership. So, well, yes, DSA is an almost entirely working class organization, and working class, I think everybody knows, but just it doesn't, you can be highly educated and be working class. DSA tends more highly educated, but we're still very much working class. But what it demonstrates is we're not broadly representative of the working class. So we're working class, but there's some really important sectors where we're not that represented. So the private sector strikes right now, we're more on the outside looking in. We're building up strike support, including in small chapters in small towns. There have been some missteps. Often the surrounding community and potentially DSA members can rally and provide support and picket even if a court order has called the union off. And this community support is essential to winning. And we're all kind of in a process of relearning that. So what does it mean? What does it mean to be in a union in general? Nowadays, hold on, I'm gonna take another sip here because I'm gonna die. It's gonna get easier when it's like questions. Take a break. What does it mean to be in a union in general? I was thinking about this question, and I think the thing that illustrates it best for me kind of is my personal experience in the Carpenters. So I'm going to go into that a little bit. Basically, you know, the first week I got into the Carpenters Union, I'd been attracted to the work because I wanted to do something physical. I knew I hated working in an office. I had $84,000 student debt to pay off, and the job that I had before was not doing it. And I did it, you know, I knew I was going into the building trades is still 97% male, so it's like still extremely male dominated. I knew it was going to be like a major change and a major shift. But the first week I was like so overwhelmed. I have to say, I went from, before I was a union organizer for a year, I was in public health, which is something like 90% women. So I went from this field that's like 90% women to a field that's like 90% guys, and like just major shock. And you know, the first day I showed up, and everybody had told me you have to get there really early, you know, and this was like right at the end of January, and it was like bitterly cold, and I did not have like the proper construction gear yet. I was out there freezing. The job started at 7 a.m. I get there at 6 a.m. I'm freezing by the time and I'm waiting for the shop steward because they told me like wait for the shop steward. So I'm like outside waiting for the shop steward, and like all these guys keep coming in and they're like giving me looks and stuff, and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing here? Kind of, you know, like this is like maybe this is like really the wrong move. Like this seems really off. And this guy, you know, this guy who I guess sort of like, I don't know, seemed like he was like stepping off a set of a movie or something. He's like tall, I'm tall, he's like taller than me, you know, he's like towering over me. He walks up at like 6:59 and he has like a cigar hanging out of his mouth and everything. And like, that's my shop steward, you know? And like, I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And like, you know, I was so intimidated, so scared the whole week, but he really took me like under his wing in this big way. And like, you know, it was a rough company. The company had a reputation for being one of the roughest like concrete companies. And right away, they started asking us to do things that we shouldn't do. Like they wanted us to go up on a scissor lift on the edge of the building where there was no place to tie off, you know. And I was fortunate I got a good steward right away because he was like, you know, he was roaring, he was running around the job, like throwing a fit about it. We weren't going to do it. Nobody else was going to do it until they got the proper safety equipment. You know, it was a really, it wasn't like collective action, you know, it wasn't like he went and organized a collective action, but it was still an extremely striking example of like what a steward is supposed to be and what a union is supposed to be. And the end of the week, you know, people weren't really talking to me all week. It was like, you know, people would give me looks, but I felt like really out of place, extremely, extremely out of place. And the end of the week, you know, I'm about to head home for the weekend, and like, I literally felt like dizzy, like my head was like spinning because just concrete jobs are like really fast paced and like it takes a little while to get used to. And I'm there, and some guy that I didn't even know came up and he was like, he was like, have a great weekend, sister. And he just like looked me directly in the eye and said that. And I was like, that was the first moment that I was like, okay, I'm really in the right place, actually. Like, this is what it is to be in a union, you know, like I'm in a brother and sister and siblinghood here, you know, like it's like, I don't know, it really kind of drove it home for me. So, you know, that's a little bit for me about what it means to be in a union. It can be a dichotomy too. You know, often at work, I can go periods where I feel like I'm not in a union at all. Some parts of the pandemic, I felt like that. I'm like, where is the union? There's no, you know, there's competition at the job a lot of times. There's, the union has no visible presence sometimes. Sometimes you get a shop steward that's not really doing their job. It feels like nobody's looking out for each other. You see no sign of the union for a while. And then from time to time, if you're fortunate, it can come roaring back, it can return. There can be something that set people off, and suddenly you find out more about your coworkers and that, you know, they're, you know, 5th generation in the union or something, and they have, you know, they actually have a wealth of experience of like how to address some of the issues. So that's kind of what it is today to me. It's, you know, often it doesn't live up to what it should in a lot of ways, but it's still a structure that's there, and there's still the potential for it to be something much more, and to be a vehicle for class struggle if we want it to be, and if we organize for it. The last thing I'm going to kind of touch on is just what's the current state of the relationship between DSA and labor. I think this is a complicated question, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's where we should be, is a complicated spot. I'm going to go ahead and chance saying that. In New York City, as probably a lot of people here are aware, we came out of the gate in the first few years after Trump got elected, pursuing a vision or a version of the rank and file strategy. So taking jobs, encouraging DSAers to take jobs in key strategic industries. We went through a process in the labor branch of really evaluating what industries we thought would be most strategic on a number of criteria. So looking at like economic power, like ability to halt production, looking at social power. Educators often have a lot of social power, so they're connected to communities, to students, to parents. They're seen as like largely trustworthy, and looking at some other key factors. And in this version of the rank and file strategy, encouraging people to go into workplaces together. So that don't just, you know, not to just go it alone, to go in with people to create a plan to organize in your workplace and union. We did this, we knew that we were facing a very immobilized labor movement in New York City with top-heavy bureaucracies. So we didn't, you know, our analysis was that we know that to get to socialism, we need, you know, we can't just do it through electoral power only. We know that we need labor power. And we're not going to get there by simply, although sometimes we want to build relationships with union leadership, we're not going to do it just through building relationships with union leadership. If the unions are largely immobilized, not doing deeper organizing, then they're not as powerful as they should be, and we can't work with them in the same way. So we knew that's kind of what we were up against. You know, unions that make endorsements a lot based on who's likely to win, not based on actual values of labor or what labor is fighting for, and that don't really back up their endorsements real people power. So the canvassing is often like very superficial, not the way DSA thankfully does it. And unions that are just out of practice exercising any real power at work or striking. And I think the McLevy piece that I really love, you know, sort of breaks it down in the classic way of like advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing. Like most of the unions in New York City, and there's some exceptions, but most I would say are like at most doing mobilizing, like at very most. And like that's true in the building trades. Like the union that I think of as like the top union right now as far as like being more progressive and like pushing things and really trying to mobilize their membership, I think is the laborers right now. The Laborers International 79. But even them, it's really a mobilizing model. It's not a deeper organizing model. You know, it's members aren't actually involved in the decision making and, you know, or the strategy of campaigns. It's kind of more just like get out in the street and like, you know, and like shout and like and all that. So when we began pursuing this, we definitely ruffled some feathers and sounded some alarm bells for some people locally in the labor movement. The rank and file strategy is more a long game. It's definitely possible to have some early wins, but it truly is a decades-long project to build a militant left unions and to be able to fight the capitalists at work. It's, you know, and that was kind of like a sacrifice we were willing to make, is like piss some people off early on, ruffle some feathers, but this is the long game, and in the long term, this is the power that we actually need to build to get where we're going. So there's that side of things. At the same time, we've done some really excellent strike support, particularly at the Hunts Point Market for the Teamsters. If anybody was able to get out there, which I'm guessing people were, because it seemed like everybody was out there. It was great. It was such a great vibe. I didn't go out like the first couple of days, so I went out after a few days of tons of DSAers being out there, and like, oh my gosh, people were so warm to DSA. Like people loved us there because we were constantly out. We had the mutual aid was like at an extremely high level. We had tons of food, just really nonstop support in a way that was like so big. You know, I think it like honestly surprised people there. Like they were so, you know, that's where it's kind of a mixed bag. It's like we're definitely winning over some union leadership, some, you know, many union members, but we've pissed some people off too. The last just little thing, you know, nationally, our PROACT work, but, you know, I think it was an explicit strategy, or there was an explicit strategy behind it to win over like sections of the labor movement, by really showing that like DSA can throw down and go all out to support labor legislature. I think that's been helpful in establishing a relationship between us and CWA, us and the painters. However, it was my impression anyways that CWA and the painters did not match like DSA's effort in terms of like phone calls or like, you know, really more deeply involving their membership. So well, I think it was a good thing to, you know, it was a good thing for its own sake. It's something good to be fighting for. The problem still kind of remains, you know, about largely immobilized memberships and lack of deeper organizing or lack of capacity to go deeper or really fight for some of these things within the labor movement. So that's it. I'm going to end there. But thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. Kind of up to you, but we were thinking of maybe like doing some group breakouts here in person, and I can help facilitate the one over Zoom, or we can also do a little bit of like Q&A first, just with the general crowd.
I could go either way. Honestly, breakouts would be fine
Yeah.
if we want to go straight into breakouts.
Cool. Yes. So just to go over our community agreements, we're not worried about anyone here, but always be comradely. Everyone's here to learn. Assume best intent when having these conversations. And I was thinking, so yeah, I can help with the Zoom facilitation, but it seems like we have enough for maybe 3 groups with like 7-ish people each, if you guys want to split according to these like sections here, and just make a circle as best you can. And Laura, you can float around or join anyone that you want. And I think we have enough poly-ed people and facilitators to help guide the conversation. Awesome. Okay, and Zoom people, I will be pausing the recording. Do that. Okay, great. Hopefully everyone had a good conversation. And did you guys all pick a report back person? Well, too bad, because someone's gonna have to go. So, okay, why don't we start with maybe the first group that was like closest to this side? Does someone wanna?
Yeah, I was selected against my will. Yeah, so we had a nice discussion. We sort of really looked at what is the working class. We discussed a bit about, you know, how it has to do with your need to sell your labor. That is what a worker is. You whether you're working or not, you're expected to sell your labor. We spoke a bit about ambivalent feelings of being maybe a more privileged type of worker with more higher wages, you know, higher social capital type work, and how even that sort of those feelings are actually quite typical for workers who do not really see the exploitation that's going on. Tell me what the second one was. Go ahead.
Oh, second question was essential workers one.
Essential workers, yeah, we had a very thoroughgoing discussion about essential work, about the power in essential work, the sort of the way that that can be skewed in some ways, also how essential labor, you know, really shows sort of like breaking points in the capitalist system where, you know, we can see areas where stuff is banned pretty easily. And the third one?
Third one was a moral strategic aspect.
Yeah. So yeah, the third one was you know, why socialists give a shit about workers at all. Moral reason, capitalism is exploitative. You know, workers are being denied the full product of their labor by a boss class. Sort of like a moralistic argument. Sorry. Strategic. Yeah. Workers are society. Workers are perhaps 80% of society, I would say. I remember the figure was a lot of petit bourgeois folks get lazy. And you know, the reason we care is because you know, workers are the great majority, and the power to throw a wrench in the whole system is sort of everything we got, you know, against the armies and the thought control and police and everything else. So yeah, thanks.
Maybe this group over here. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotcha. I don't know if I'm loud enough for people here on Zoom, but okay, perfect. Yeah, so I don't know if we hit these questions specifically, but we kind of broadly reflected on everybody's experience organizing and with labor unions and labor organizing, that kind of stuff. So some of the stuff we sort of that came up over and over again was the difficulty, especially now, of trying to figure out how to unionize certain labor sectors when labor has really changed. Thinking about like how much is like intellectually based sort of knowledge labor. So there was talk about how do you organize, teachers, especially, or like, there was a talk about, I think, like dancers and in that world, and sort of like, I think also my own experience in STEM and stuff like that. So like figuring out how to break through those barriers. Some of the things that have changed as well as like the reflecting on some of how politics has kind of worked its way back into workshop organizing, in the sense that like, I think Lee was kind of reflecting on how in the past it's sort of been like, organizing on the workshop floor is just strictly for, issues in the workplace, and we're not supposed to connect it more broadly to, broader political questions or whatever. And some of how that's changed. I think Nils was talking a little bit about experience at NYU and doing some organizing there, and how more social justice kind of issues were brought more to the fold. At a place like NYU, that's a little bit easier. So the difficulty is sort of, how can you talk about something like police abolition, for example, in a union that's not, part of a major liberal, university or whatever. So yeah, I think those are some of the big things we talked about. And yeah, I think the one other question I guess that I had was sort of thinking about the value of organizing in certain sectors. One thing that's really on my mind is this United Metro Energy Company strike, the Teamster strike over in Greenpoint, and sort of like, how to connect labor organizing there, where they're organizing a workplace that's around fossil fuels, and sort of how can socialists, especially if we're, as much, labor activists and organizers, but also eco-socialists, and how to connect like, oh, the job you're doing kind of is part of what's destroying the environment, but your power is still important, even in that workplace, and how to connect that to the broader struggle. So yeah, I think that's pretty much mostly what we covered, but yeah, I'm sure I missed something.
Yeah, so our group had very similar conversations to the first and second groups about who makes up the working class, how strikes in like strategic sectors, would like really, how do I say, like would like really disrupt things in a noticeable way. And we also talked about differences between advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing, with advocacy and mobilizing being more like individual opt-in activities, while organizing would mean be more part of like a group effort. Yeah, pretty much everything else you said was covered by like the first two groups, so I'm not gonna repeat everything. But yeah.
Awesome. So no pressure. Okay, awesome. Well, let me wheel this back a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording.